order the Thursday, February 9th Planning Commission meeting at 6 o'clock. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of
Allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, next thing on our agenda tonight is to approve the agenda. Do we have any adjustments or changes to the agenda put forth tonight?
I make a motion we approve the agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Do we have a recommendation and a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
So moved. Next on the agenda is to approve the January 12th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting minutes. They should be in the packet, and for anyone who doesn't have one, they're on the back table. Do we have any adjustments or any changes to it?
Move to approve.
Second.
Second.
We have a move and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Department, Commission Liaison, any other reports tonight?
I don't have anything, Mr. Chair.
I got nothing.
Nothing fun? All right. Well,
Going for a record tonight or
oh my
what?
goodness, nothing? All right. Eric doesn't have anything for us tonight, so I guess we'll move on.
Anything good, at least, you know.
What's next?
All right, so we got the visitor public comment. So this is an opportunity for the public to address the commission with questions or comments on issues that are or are not part of the regular agenda. Please limit comments to 3 minutes in length. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the public hearing, which we have no public hearings tonight. Any new business? No new business. So we'll move on to the old business, which we talked about last meeting, about the urban heat islands, parking requirements, and landscaping. Scott, do you have?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Again, a continuation of our discussion on urban heat islands, parking requirements, and landscaping. You last discussed it at your January 12th meeting, and we had some discussion items, and it was determined that we would come back with a few changes and not hold a public hearing, at least for this meeting. Potentially, we could do it at the next meeting if you're comfortable with moving forward with items. I'm not going to go through really what we've discussed already. The newer language is in red on page 5. Curb cut size. I don't know if we discussed this, or is this something that I had a brainchild on? Curb cut size. Curb cut access shall exceed 24. No curb cut access shall exceed 24 feet in width. Or 32 feet when assessing a street highway, separate conditional use permit. It seems like a lot of process for something like that, and that's really an engineering item that our city engineer could say yea or nay to. So again, just to simplify that, we are eliminating that next page, the whole page of table that really is meaningless. We talked on page 7 about impervious our pervious pavers, and decided not to incorporate language related to pervious pavement at this time. Continuing through, just hop in, any of you, if you have any comments. Page 9, number of spaces required. I believe Tyler made a good comment about some of the language in terms of it was referring to at least, and hopefully I caught all those. If any of you eagle eyes look at some of that language and realize that maybe that's not that doesn't read quite right, let me know. But I think I caught them all in looking at that.
Scott, do you want us to wait until you're done? Come back?
Yeah, you know what? I'm almost done. So let me just kind of go through on page 14 off-street loading requirements. They were eliminating almost 2 pages of text. There really no need to have those loading requirements. And then finally, with the design guidelines, zoning ordinance landscape requirements, we talked about that a bit. And you can see on page 15 that I made some changes, like B, just to clarify that rain gardens, or there's a little discussion about rain gardens, but where needed for stormwater treatment. There are places where, you know, they may be required, and I wanted to clarify that. Also, talking to Lisa, our arborist, increase that from 6 feet by 6 feet to 8 feet by 8 feet. Lisa's comment was 8 feet is really the minimum amount. If you really want substantial trees to grow, that's the size you need to be at. So I thought that, I trust Lisa on that, and I think that probably goes along with what Kathy Wyden, who was here for many years as our arborist too, would have said, that at 8 feet is probably more appropriate. And then E, I just made reference to all parking lot landscape design plans should be approved by the city arborist, and then tied it to ordinance 1304, 1307 with city code and landscape guidelines for developers and design guidelines. So it made that tie in. So again, and then I updated the amount of square footages that would impact. But I feel comfortable with that 8-foot requirement. And then finally, I guess as I mentioned earlier, if you're comfortable maybe opening this up for public comment, maybe we consider doing that at the next meeting. If you're not comfortable, if you want to see some more changes, we can always bring it back for discussion. So that is all I had. So Tim, I guess you want to jump in?
Yeah, I have a few questions on page 9. I don't know if I talked about this last month or not, but under item E, it's the very last sentence right before F there, it's adding the and side property lines.
Right.
Does that make sense in the residential zone though? Because, like if, the example that I come up with in my mind was when you're on a cul-de-sac and you got those radial lines going out, to come up with a 5-foot setback in addition. I mean, the setback for the buildings obviously need to be the same.
Right,
But,
right.
When you're doing a parking pad, does the parking pad really need to be 5-foot setback? And the reason I ask is because I built one and, built it according to the code and had Julie look at it and it's all fine. It goes right to the property line.
Right. I guess there's two things. We typically have utility and drainage easements of 5 feet
Yep.
along those property lines.
Yep.
I'm thinking about the case, though, of the cul-de-sacs.
Do we want to leave some verbiage in there that allows staff to make a decision so it doesn't have to go for conditional use, but that's the standard policy?
Yeah, maybe that's the way to handle it. I was thinking of that last case we had with the parking pad that essentially covered the whole side yard, and the fact that they could go right to the property line.
Yeah.
And you know what, that's really not fair to the neighbors. But, in developing this language, many decades ago with Jim Butler, we're looking at the lots over just to the east of us in the Swagger development,
Yep.
where
Yep.
things were so close
Yep.
that in order for people to get a parking pad, you almost had to go all the way to the. But
And I'm not worried about myself because either way I would grandfather in, but I'm just thinking about people in the future. Are there areas where we're only talking about parking pads now. We're not talking about
Right.
everything else. We're
Right.
just talking about the parking pads.
pads
So,
in residential areas.
yeah, I was thinking that if we could just change that to not in the residential zones. What are the minimum widths? I'm trying to think, even the minimum width when we're on a cul-de-sac is less than 60 feet. Because there's a lot of cul-de-sacs you can't, like for frontage.
Right,
You can't
right.
get that much frontage, so those are the people that would be squeezed more than anybody.
Yeah, I can see that with cul-de-sacs. So let me think about that a little bit.
Or
There
maybe
is
have
some
a staff exception if
flexibility.
there's less than
Flexibility can build into that seems reasonable. I really don't want to go all the way to the property line.
Oh, I
think
understand
there
that,
should be
yep.
a little bit of
Yep.
a setback.
I just wanted to talk about it more than anything. I just know that.
A staff exception, the staff, Eric's looking at me like he doesn't want that, but
I don't want that.
You want a little harder and faster.
Well, it's
for
because
interpretation.
everything then becomes kind of subjective, and
Right.
we don't like things subjective because in these contexts, because it puts neighbor against neighbor, and we don't want to necessarily be that way. These are the rules, live with them. But
Yeah.
another challenge with beyond just the setback of, I would encourage you to keep the 5 feet, what have you. But sometimes that becomes a 3-dimensional problem too, because
true. Yep.
because the neighbor's driveway is higher than the property side yard. So it's not even so much that they want to go closer, but they also want to build a little retaining wall and fill it in. Now you got this little retaining wall right up against the property line. So it
creates a safety.
Well, and the ordinance right now just says
Yeah.
5 feet from the rear.
Right.
So you're recommending that we add and sides.
Right.
It's not in the ordinance now.
I agree that there should be something in there to keep it away from the adjoining property, but there also has to be exceptions to the rule, right? When you don't have that much space,
And
or you can't put a parking
If
pad
it's
there, I guess.
worded this way and someone wanted to vary from it, there's always a variance process, unless you want to make it a CUP.
I know that it doesn't, in my particular case, I went over and talked to my neighbor about it, even though I had talked to Julie, I think, and Eric about how close can I go, and it says, well, just from the rear. So I went over to my neighbor and asked him, what do you think, and he said, yeah, it didn't make any difference, that's the side of my house where I don't have any windows over there, and so and I know that, we took out the part on the top in that same section that says written
Right.
approval by abutting owners. I hate to give the neighbors the authority, but I just felt like I wanted to talk to them just because I didn't want to, get off
You
on
know
the wrong
what,
foot
this
with
comes
somebody.
up so rarely
Yeah.
that let's maybe leave the 5 feet and then have exceptions by conditional use permit. Because that may be once every 4 years we have to do it.
If that even, it's, I don't know how many more large residential neighborhoods we're going to get, but I'm guessing it's not going to be very
But
many.
there's always going to be, in established neighborhoods, people want a parking pad as they
Yep.
move in. So does that make sense to leave it at 5?
It does, and I think that what you can, in the R1 zone, can you have your garage 5 feet from the property line?
I think if it's a
side
attached
yard.
garage, side yard, and it's
Yeah.
10.
And no house
Yeah, it's
behind
10.
that, it can be 5 feet?
No, 10-foot side yard setback.
Oh, 10-foot
10
side
foot,
yard on all cases, yeah.
In R1,
Okay, and R2?
I think that's the same.
I think it's the same.
Yeah, okay.
There's some rear yard setbacks for accessory structures that they can go to 5 or 8 for detached.
Yeah,
and,
okay.
right.
Well, okay, I just wanted to bring it up so we talked about it. I was thinking about it today about where would you ever need to be less than 5 feet, and I thought about cul-de-sacs, so,
Yeah, 10 feet on R1, R2,
okay,
side yard.
okay. Well, I'm all right with leaving it that way too, I guess, I'm not. Okay, the next thing I have is on the same page 9, under paragraph 7, use of required area. The last part of that last sentence says and/or storage of snow. And I think I know what the idea behind that is, Scott, that, you don't want to have it just be a place to put snow. But some people don't have room in that,
But we talked
So
about
they-
this last time too, wasn't this what we talked about, that some of those additional green spaces might need to be multi-purpose uses? Because we're losing parking spaces that aren't allowed to be used
This
for
is-
snow now, but are
Yeah,
still
I was
used for
going to
snow?
change the language on snow storage on the previous page on 8, and then we went back to the language that we have.
But it just seems like, and I can think of people having something stored there in the summertime, like a boat or whatever on their parking pad area or whatever part of their off-street parking, but in the winter moving it so that they could put snow there, I know my driveway at the top is a 3-car garage, and it's hard to
Get rid of it.
You can't
Just
push it all to the end, it can't go out in the street.
The only thing I'm thinking of is, what if people, fill up their driveway full of snow, and then all of a sudden they're parking out in the street?
They're gonna get a ticket for that, though. I mean,
That's true. To be, I didn't notice this one as much, and
We adjust-
Scott, I would argue that could go away.
That the and/or
I
storage
think
of
from
snow.
an enforcement standpoint, when we'd write a letter, hey, you can't pile snow here, I can't do that.
Yeah,
right?
next to your driveway, you can't put snow there.
Yeah, certainly a derelict car.
Are you guys talking about just snow storage or the whole section?
No, just that last part of that sentence,
okay,
and
just
or
clarify.
storage of snow. That's the only part that I
Right,
flagged.
yeah.
All the rest
Yeah,
of
okay,
it.
that's what I
makes-
thought, I just wanted
I
to
mean,
make
you don't want inoperable cars or people
Right.
selling stuff or, but
Yep,
just
gotcha.
the snow storage seemed like,
Okay.
okay. And then I'm okay until I get to page 15. And I just want to run something by you guys. I have a bunch of red writing on here, but it's all basically the same issue. I'm a fan of the 8-foot wide, and I talked to Lisa today
Okay, good.
to find out how much input she had and if she thinks she needs more input. And she said that she replied to your comments and just didn't really spend much more time talking about anything other than that width. And I'm a fan of the width. What I'm not a fan of is under 12A, screen with a combination of landscape materials, landform, decorative fencing, or walls sufficient to screen parking cars on a year-round basis. And about the only way to do that is either with a wall, a fence, or evergreens. And I'm not a fan of the walls, I'm not a fan of the fences, and I'm certainly not a fan of Lisa's not a fan of the evergreens. So I wonder if, we're not trying to box it in so that you can't see the property. I think that's the wrong way to go. And that was kind of part of my comment from last month, was that I hate to see the screening block the building off so people can't find it. And I have an example in Woodbury. I went to a Italian restaurant there that was right on County Road 19, which is a fairly heavily traveled, and Valley Creek Road. And on that intersection, on the southeast quadrant, there's a holiday station that you would never know was there because they have it bermed with trees. And the whole kind of development with it, I drove back and forth on Valley Creek, and I drove north and south on, and you can't see that development. If you didn't know and your Google Maps didn't tell you to go there, you wouldn't know what was there. And I don't know that that's what we're looking for. I think that businesses would be,
Well, maybe the
tough, you know.
issue with that, I don't have a problem with the first part of that sentence, and probably is appropriate. Parking areas shall be screened with a combination of landscape materials, landform, decorative fencing, or walls. And then strike the sufficient to screen parking cars on a year-round basis. Maybe that could go. And the intent is just to say, hey, we want to see our landscape. It's kind of an introduction to the rest of the section.
Yep. And so if we stopped it on a year-round basis and then left in the part that says, while providing adequate visibility for pedestrians, that's my biggest issue, is not being able to see it.
It's a good point, actually.
Yeah, so
I would say, and decorative fencing or walls while providing adequate visibility for
Yeah, I
pedestrians.
think if we have adequate visibility for pedestrians, I think that covers what I'm. I like the idea that it's being screened, but I don't want to make it a wall or close it in so that it feels shut off.
And there's other sections that provide when you've got a transition from commercial to or industrial to residential. There are specific requirements there, which have served us very well. And this actually really is irrelevant because we've got other sections to deal with. Okay, good.
The next thing that I have in that same area, it's actually in paragraph B, the 360 square feet. I understand where you came up with that number. What I'm trying to figure out is, do we want to put a square footage number for islands, or do we want to talk about their how often they're needed? And the reason I say that is that to make when you come up with 320 or 300 actually, it was 320 if you use the length and width of an 8-foot island.
Right.
But when you're building islands and you want to drive where there's an island, if you make it 20 feet long, you're not going to get into that first stall because it's just too far. So typically they make them 8 by 8 or 8 by 10, or just to give enough room for when someone's swinging in there that they can get past it. I think it needs to be 8 feet. Lisa agrees that that's the minimum. They should be 8 feet.
Okay.
But how long there, I think we could just probably cover it better by, instead of saying a square footage, to say how frequently we think islands need to be put in there, or maybe leave it up to Lisa, because we're going to say in here that, aren't we going to say something? I thought we were saying something in here that they need to be approved by the arborist. So,
Right.
And I talked to her about that too, and she said, yeah, it's not so much the square footage, just making sure they're big enough when you do
Just
put
make it
them in.
big enough when you do put them in.
So, I don't know, what does everybody else think about that? I'm not trying to necessarily make them smaller, I'm just trying to make sure that the ones that get built are usable, but they're still big enough that we can grow trees in there if they want to. I'm not a big fan of like shade trees in a parking lot because of the...
Scott, but what's happening here with this paragraph B is, regardless of the size or the location of some island, some peninsula, right? Whether they're 8 by 8, if I'm hearing you correctly. But rather, I think the target of paragraph B is fundamentally to say, for every 25 stalls, you need to have some square footage of,
Right.
Or
We're not
size.
telling them how to design them,
Yeah,
except for
Size of
being
an
an 8
island,
by
but
8.
not necessarily square
Well,
footage.
right,
Yeah.
but that paragraph doesn't, if I'm reading it correctly, doesn't say how it has to be designed.
Right.
It says that you have to have one. And so if the premise is that, okay, you have to have them, and none of them can be smaller fundamentally than 8 by 8, isn't that what these two things are saying? They can make them bigger, or they can, you
Right,
know,
they're just a bare minimum of how many
it's
square feet.
dictating
per-
how many
per number
square
of
feet
stalls.
they need to be.
And I like the square footage because you can do what you're saying. You just have to make it a foot wider. If you want to shrink it,
No,
adjust it.
Isn't-
keep the
320 square feet is if you have a 20 by 8.
Right, so if you had a 18 by 10, you would have 300, or if you had an 18 by 20, you'd have 360 square foot. So you drop it a foot on each end and you would just widen it by 2 feet, you would have 360.
What I'm wondering is, do we want a square footage thing, or do we want to have a certain spacing? Because to me, the location of islands in the parking lot is more important than how big they are, as long as they're big enough to grow the kinds of things that Lisa says we need
But that
room
will
for.
depend on, you know, the slope and what some of the drainage, they might be
Yep.
using the drainage to,
Part
you
of
know,
the island,
to irrigation purposes, so they don't want all the islands up on front, they want them down the hill,
Right.
which might be just fine.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the city needs to say where they go, but the city's just saying, hey, you gotta have some statistics, some ratio of them.
We're leaving it up to them to design their parking islands. That will be reviewed by Lisa.
I would hope so, yeah.
Yeah, so, and that, I don't think we're, as Eric says, we're telling them where to put them, just that you have to have so much.
And I like that better than saying every 25 stalls, right? Because then all of a sudden all the parking lots look the same. 'cause
Well,
you
it's
have
just a
this many
ratio.
rows.
I think what we're
Yeah.
saying for every, maybe if the ratio could be clarified in a different way, so a stall is what, 9 foot wide by 90 square feet, pick a number?
9 by 18, 9 by 20, yeah.
Yeah, okay, 9 by 20, yeah, duh.
I don't
But-
think you want the island, I'm saying you don't want the island to be as long as the parking stall, because then you can't get into the.
Oh, I totally get that, but I don't think the city's saying it should be here or should be there. They're just saying you have to have something.
So you make a good point, though, and that I hadn't thought about. So you're not going to have the full length of an island, let's say, alongside a parking stall at 20 feet. You'll probably shorten that up, what, 2 feet, 3 feet? Just so you can get.
So they can get into them, yep.
18 by
So maybe that number can be a little bit less.
Yeah,
Scott,
and maybe, maybe just lowering the square footage so that it allows them to put in an 8 by 10 or something like that for every 25, which is 80.
324 square feet.
And,
Well, yeah, 'cause
and I
they're
guess the
giving
other
free.
thing about the 25 stalls, you know, the story that I thought I heard when you talked about that was that the Kohl's parking lot, every 25 stalls, there's an island. But what I wondered about is when there's two cars pointing at each other, is that 25 on each side, or is that, because that would be 50 cars. How, do you remember? Because I think you went up, you were the one that
They
came
were
up with the.
just straight parking stalls, but it doesn't make a difference how those are. Every 25, you have to have X number of square.
No,
feet.
that's not what this is saying. If I'm reading this, that what I think what this is saying is, if you build a parking lot that has 100 stalls, somewhere on that space, you need to have 1,200 or 1,300 square feet of.
That's all it's
And we
saying.
don't care where you put it.
Yeah, that's the way I read this too.
Right,
It
you can
doesn't
have
matter.
we don't care, it doesn't have to be
You can
next
have
to
100
any.
stalls in a row and you put it on one end or
Right,
the other.
right, that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Right, but and I agree with that, that's the intent, but what Tim is saying, that maybe our number is a little bit high.
A little strong is all I was thinking. And I
Which
don't-
number? Which,
The three-
Whether it's 320,
360 square feet.
360, or
oh,
whatever.
yeah, maybe.
And
But-
you know, and I'm not complaining that it's too much. I just, if we're trying to get spacing wise, one of those islands of whatever Lisa recommends, at least the minimum of every 25 stalls, then maybe our square footage number needs to be closer to 300 square feet instead of 360. To allow them to have it at 10 by 8 or whatever. But it says in the, you know, in the next one, it says they have to be at least 8 and they have to be at least 8 feet long, so.
as a minimum size,
Yeah.
but they could be bigger.
They could be bigger than that, and they probably will be bigger than that.
So
I'm
if you
sure
pick a
they-
number in the middle, let's say if 300's too low and 360's too high, go 330.
Because those islands
If you did
could
a
be,
if you did a 9 foot wide, which is 9 foot wide, a standard stall, and you did 18 foot, which gives you a foot on each side, that's 324 square feet.
Except that that ordinance calls for 20-foot stalls. 9 by
But
20.
You want it
unless-
to be a foot shorter so you can get in and out. So your island would be shorter than your stall. So you could make your corner like you've talked about. So that would be 324 square feet,
Okay.
right?
Well, I would just suggest you pick a number in the middle and
let me
let her rip,
draw out
Scott.
a few things and mull that over a little bit.
Yeah,
But I see where you're
I think
coming
you
from,
get my
Tim.
point, and I'm not trying to, I mean, I'm not trying to say we shouldn't have islands. I'm not saying they shouldn't be at least wider than they're required now. But I like the idea, and I think you're talking about that, Mr. Chairman, about giving them some opportunity to design it, because I don't think the city should be in the business of
And
telling
that's
them what their
exactly the
lots.
discussion I wanted you guys to have, because
Yeah.
it was just my idea, and I wanted you guys to mull
No,
over
and I
what
think
it
that's
was.
what you were saying, is make it shorter, because a standard stall is 20 foot, so you want to have room to get in and out. So
Yep.
if you shrink it by a foot on each end, or 2 feet,
Yes.
that's and keep the width the same.
Yeah, I don't know
That's
that
your
those,
320.
I don't know if those islands need to go all the way to the end of the stall. I think if they went halfway up the stall, they'd be
Well, but
plenty-
again, the city is not saying where they go.
Yeah, they can build them however they want.
They can build them at the far end of the lot and won't even be affect.
The landscaping could be down the middle of them with stalls on either side, for
Right,
instance. There's
right,
nothing
that's
that
another,
goes along the side.
that's another
so-
good way to do it, too.
Yeah. But we don't want to say this is the way it has to be.
Right.
Designer, because every lot is different, every shape of every lot is different.
So you're right, the square footage is probably the better way to go as far as picking something, but,
But whether it's 360,
But 360
320,
is a-
324.
you know, that's
let's
a
think
9
about
by
that.
20, and otherwise you're putting in extra islands because you're trying to hit the square footage
How
number.
deep should these islands be? I'm kidding you.
It talks about, there's a length and a width.
I like the square
Minimum
footage.
length, minimum width.
I guess, can staff come back with a recommendation?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll come
just-
back.
You understand what my point was, and I
Perfect,
don't care about the 360 or what the number is, or that I guess now that I think about it, that it's even, a square footage is the problem. I just think that if we're trying to make them all the full length and the full width, and every 25 feet, we were gonna have them everywhere.
But that's
And it
not
might
the-
be too much,
But
but-
that's not the purpose, is they need to have this much square footage for every 25 stalls, not every 25 in a row or anything like
All right,
that.
that ends my comments.
Thank
Can
you.
I throw a curveball on all of that discussion?
Feel free.
Great. So I'm thinking that this language protects the big places like Kohl's, Walmart, the giant lots that have area to cut into. But when you look at B and C combined, saying 8 by 8 is great for areas like that can have large trees. Think about Aldi, which probably hits 25 minimum stalls. They're full all the time. They don't have the room to add an 8 by 8 space. So my curveball is for C, calling it a square footage instead of an 8 by 8 requirement. Because there's unique lots, there could be triangle shaped lots where they don't have massive purchase to put in a big block of tree, like Kohl's and Walgreens and or Walmart and everything like that. It's the littler guys that I'm more worried about than these big ones that, no questions asked, they'll drop a tree in the back of the lot.
Yeah, again, if we're trying to accomplish growing large trees impacting urban heat island, you have to have a minimum. So, you know, they're good.
Or just to have any
Did you
trees
base it on the
grow.
size of the box?
But why does it have to be a tree? Because we're saying that
store?
there could be rain gardens, there could be landscaping, you know, the shrubbery or whatever. You're not always going to be able to fit a tree. And I think C prevents, C in the backing of the tree sheet in the back prevents the little awkward spots that have to follow this recommendation from doing anything besides an 8 by 8. I just wonder if square footage, I mean, we can have a parameter of 8 by 8 when we can dive deeper and have parameters and examples and whatever, but the little guys with awkward spots probably can't do an 8 by 8.
Yeah, your strip malls, your Carbonis, your Aldis are gonna have a struggle, and they probably all have more than 25 stalls.
But does the space on the outside of the parking lot, like Aldi's got the space between the frontage, does that count?
Well, peninsulas, again, a peninsula is something that comes out,
It's like an island, yeah.
like an island.
Yeah, coming into Carboni's, there's a peninsula that comes around
When you come in.
those, the ends right when you come in, but nowhere else could they put a tree. And if that qualifies under all of this language as needing to have something, then they need to theoretically plant trees in the frontage, is what you're suggesting, between the sidewalk and the parking lot, and there's exceptions to the rule.
You can always get a variance if you want to do it by CUP, we can. But you got to have a minimum standard, you got to start somewhere. And is the threshold 25 or is it 50?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think
If
there's
we're
just
worried
gonna be-
about, the really, really small lots.
Could adjust the threshold up to a little bit, because that would eliminate the major, I don't think Aldi has 50, do they have 50 stalls?
I would
I
have,
doubt it.
I'll check that, I'll take a look.
They probably got
You make a good
40
point about all the,
40 or so, I would think.
They'd be the closest one I would think of,
as far as being a busy lot.
as far as being busy.
Yeah,
But because like, that would eliminate Carboni's and a lot of strip mall space.
Although Carboni's just added just a whole field
That
of
whole
parking.
cul-de-sac area that would have been a cul-de-sac area down below that
Oh, did
got
we sell that
shut
to him?
off
No, their lease is a lease,
from MinDOT, isn't
Did
it?
they get it? I didn't know they got it.
Yeah,
oh,
Yeah.
the last I heard they did.
I hope so. 'Cause
So then
that's
are
the
we
worst- That's the
also-
worst parking lot in town.
Are we also saying the high school needs to put in islands because they're also a massive
Yep.
concrete jungle
Yep.
that needs, and they're always full. So
Again, they sell fewer permits.
They keep adding on.
The
and
school-
Then they cut it back with the
The
number of
school
permits,
runs
like
a
when my kid was
wonderful
there.
yellow limousine service too.
Yeah.
As an
Well, the school does have a complex stormwater management system on site.
Yes.
They built a number of filtration basins at that site with their 2015 expansion. Remember the whole Valley Branch review
Yep.
stuff? So their rules were probably more rigid than what, but I think what Commissioner Husby is saying, maybe we need to parse this out with, Scott, maybe we can talk offline and say, okay, we can come up with some ratio of acreage size, big site, small size. I don't know what that means, but let us take a stab at it.
Yeah, let's take a step. What is really helpful is to take a look at the aerial photographs,
Yep,
because
yep.
I can,
Yep.
those things are so clear that I can take a look at the Aldi parking lot and say, oh, that's 45 spaces, and then try to think about that, and does it make sense? I only looked at a few examples, and I looked at the really big parking lots.
Yeah.
I didn't look at the little parking lots.
Yeah, the
So that's a good exercise.
In that particular case, the way, the answer to that is that when you got two parts of parking coming together, you can't use the square.
Yeah,
You're
if
gonna
it's
have
not
a
a
20 by
big-
20.
You
call
can
that
use
an
it, you
island.
just don't get credit for it.
But they should be able to use it if they were to plant that instead of leaving it in blacktop. That would be a really big island, if you will. I mean, that's the idea of that kind of thing anyway.
Yeah.
So.
But they don't necessarily have to plant trees, and maybe it's
No,
just.
just
like-
grass. It's, just like everything else that we say can be in those green areas.
Can they use their roof space?
Well, they can if they desire, but they still have to deal with the water that comes off their
Yep.
parking lot.
Impervious
right?
surface.
Yeah.
Now, how much water is developed. I also misspoke when I said I had no more items. There's some stuff, on-
Commissioner
there's stuff on page 12
Page 12.
that I forgot about. And you guys jogged my memory when you started talking about Carboni's. I'm just talking about sections AA and BB. And the only thing I want to say about that is, I don't know if we should reduce those parking requirements. Because just about every fast food and sit-down restaurant in town has got a parking lot that's used or full at least some of the time. You think about Joseph's, I think about, all of the fast foods, Carboni's. They're not always full all of the time, but there are times, and I'm guessing every day, that they fill that parking lot up.
The,
And so, to make
the
them
fact
small.
with that is, so let's say they're going to rebuild Arby's.
Okay.
Okay, that has been redone.
Yep.
And let's say they met this current standard. All those franchises have their minimums of what they feel is necessary. So if that goes against this, then we review it by conditional use permit and have them prove why they think they need that many parking spaces.
Okay, well, that makes sense. I was just wondering why we were lowering, we cut everything in half, but I just
Well,
wondered if those
especially
two-
with fast food, because again, the utilization of fast food is all drive-through
Just-
now.
just changed,
It's
yeah.
like 60/40, maybe
Yeah.
even
Yeah, that's
70/30, the 30 being the sit-down. So a lot of those fast food restaurant parking lots are sitting empty. McDonald's is an example where they've always been less than this. I mean, it was just an old McDonald's on a small site.
Yeah.
And then when they were doing, I don't know if they ever did a kiddie area on that one. I don't think that one ever had one, but, when people were coming to the restaurant, spending Saturday afternoons, you need all those parking spaces. Well, they don't do that anymore.
Yeah, right.
They're in and
right.
out.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, but I was thinking about parking lots and all of it, that I think there was somewhat of an arbitrary, let's cut them in half. And I thought, well, you're not doing that in the schools, and some of the places you're not doing that, but I just wondered if
And
this needed to be another one. that we
I've
thought
dealt with
about.
Excelsior for years. Excelsior, small city,
Yep.
traditional city, we had a influx of restaurants and a big push back and forth. I did a lot of studies on
Okay.
restaurants and numbers of parking spaces required. And what I found is this requirement that we currently have is just
It's just too much, huh? Okay,
parking spaces.
okay. Well, I
It
stand
was
corrected then,
written
'cause
for a different era when more people would go out and
Yeah.
sit for 2 hours and have their old fashions and their prime rib and.
Scott,
You mean in the bars, taverns, and nightclubs that we talk about?
Scott, if we
Private clubs?
if we said to folks who came and wanted to build let's just say a sit-down restaurant, not a fast food place, and I don't know what the heck it would be, what's the,
Yeah, where?
somebody wanted to build an Olive Garden here in town. That's because that's because I'm so worldly, right? So if they found a space, and we told them they have to build one, or the minimum is at least one space for every 40 square feet, what would they say? Or would they say that doesn't work for us anymore? Would they argue for lower, and where they'd be more on the side of 1 per 100? Because I think this is new for us, that we're trying to basically not require people to do something. We're saying,
What I'm finding in a lot of parking standards, that the more current standard is the 1 per 100. I've seen that in a lot of different ordinances. You rarely ever see the 1 per 40 anymore.
and if we stood on them and said, no, this is our rule, they would have to put in extra 60 spaces.
Well, they wouldn't have to, because they're likely going to have to go through a review process through the city anyway, at least even the design standards. So we have them do a conditional use permit, and again, they show us, based upon their
No,
standards.
but if we
what makes
stuck
sense.
with what we have.
Right.
And the argument would be, well, this is the rule. Maybe that might make somebody choose not to invest in the city if we're going to have this higher requirement, whereas it's not justifiable in the market anymore. To me, this is good to
Okay.
reduce that.
So you're arguing actually in favor of changing.
Right. I'm just saying, what would people say if they saw our old rule and say, well, why is this is really antiquated? Is that what people would say?
I have run across that in Excelsior with restaurateurs that go, whoa, that is a lot of parking spaces
Yeah.
in an area where land values are so high in Lake Minnetonka.
Yeah,
And, it probably has detracted a lot of people from, let's say, the Lake Minnetonka cities with standards like this. This is Wayzata's standard too.
Okay.
Because we wrote that ordinance, we wrote Excelsior's, and then, we wrote this one all at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, I think as long as that, I was thinking that if, you go through and arbitrarily just cut them in half, and it becomes a problem, then we look at it again and change it, you know what I mean? That's the way, this isn't cast in stone.
The one thing, I thought about at the end of this on page 14 with the conditional use permit, and I thought, well, do we need to have them go through a conditional use permit to vary from our parking standards? And actually driving over, I thought, we're going to make them, with any restaurant, make them go through the process anyway.
gotta do it
Just add a
anyways, right?
conditional use permit, put the burden on them to say, this parking standard makes sense for us or it doesn't. So.
And, and if they've got, most of those corporate places that, the Olive Gardens and all of those, they probably got a number, and if you question it, they probably can come up with some statistics that say, here's the reason why.
And
you look at it and go, yeah, that makes sense.
We've
to us.
asked for that in the past, and all these places have given it.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, we just had a potential developer come in on Wednesday, and we said, well, we're switching changing our multiple family center to one per unit. He goes, oh, we want to build 2 units anyway.
Yeah, well, then,
So,
yep.
you know, with the type of units that they're looking at,
Sure.
they would still want 2.
Yeah.
So we just, you know, we'd consider that.
Yep. Okay, well, I think it was all good discussion. I think we
Yeah,
had
it
way
was
more
great.
discussion tonight than we had last month.
Well, that's what I was hoping, that all of you had a chance to have it sink in.
So I was reading through and I noticed you do have 50 or more cars in there. So it's gotta have 50 or more stalls. It's on 14, paragraph 4. That's already in there. So we just gotta check and see if all these,
That it only relates to that
if it's
big of a
50
lot.
or if we need to adjust that number, because it's already in there as 50. That it only applies to locations with more than 50.
That's the old standard.
Oh,
That's the old standard. That's the old standard that's in the design standard.
oh, sorry.
And I switched it to 25.
Okay.
Now I've got 50 question mark with the arrow going on.
Okay, sorry, I read that wrong then.
Yeah,
Okay.
so,
Okay.
Well, I think it does make sense, though, to have some sort of, this is for big parking lots that have this many stalls or larger, and,
yeah, we don't want to, again, dissuade the small business because of these standards. You know, we want to still encourage those smaller business, smaller parking requirements, less of an urban heat island. I think what we're really trying to do is, if we see development out west in those big parking lots, we want to see some more mitigation of heat islands.
yeah.
Commissioner
Okay.
Freeman, do you have any more comments?
I am good, sir.
Commissioner Van Dyke, do you have anything?
I got one. It goes back to what I brought up last week about min and max on page 9, number 9.
Yeah.
So we tweaked a lot of the less than sentences out of there.
Oh, sure.
But when you read each of these, unless I missed something, they read as minimums.
What page are you on, 9?
Yeah, number 9.
Oh, 9 at the bottom.
Min/max over off-street parking. So unless there's something in here that I missed as considered a max, it seems like they either need to be the following minimum number of off-street parking or just remove min-max. Because by saying both and not providing both as a min and a max to follow on each of them, it seems
And that's
conflicting.
kind of where we're going with that.
Thought we talked about that.
I think we just need to remove the max from that verbiage, don't we?
Pardon me?
We just need to remove the max from the verbiage.
No, actually,
No, no,
it's dark,
it's
so I
He's
added
adding
it.
it.
Oh, you're adding it.
Because I think the discussion came up, well, if it's just a minimum and the developer wants to build a lot more, do we really want that?
Yeah, do we want to ask them
We
why?
want to ask them why, we want to make
Do we
them
need
go
to
through
remove
the
the
initial
min?
use
I
permit
think you'd want them
process.
to justify it if they wanted a lot more.
But you can't, you can't have both without having a parameter. You're writing this as a minimum, we're trying to limit a max. All right, so then what's the max? Versus the other way, if you write a max,
I think
guys-
it says what it says, the following minimum, maximum
but read
number.
through each one of the points, like ball fields, 1 parking space for 8 seats. Okay, so I consider that as a minimum, but reading 9.9 header,
It's
what is
also
the
maximum.
maximum?
It is a maximum.
It is the maximum as well.
It's the
That
same.
parking standard is the minimum and the maximum. That's what we're trying to convey.
The language is confusing.
Okay.
By writing both and not seeing both face value, I can obviously,
The following standards are minimum and maximums, we should say, or something like that.
That is what it says.
It's just min/max. I think you need to put the and in there.
Minimum and maximum required number.
I can see the confusion. Is it
Yeah.
standard verbiage though in legalese, Scott?
We're making this up as
Should
we
see if we
go
know
along.
anybody who knows stuff about legal stuff. Maybe you could ask him.
I mean, there are standard verbiage.
I know you're sitting in the seat wanting to say something.
Or not.
I think what we're, you
Well,
know,
you make a good point, because I actually consider that, Taylor, that does that convey what we're really looking for just by adding /maximum?
The fact that
But
we-
I think we could reword
The
that.
fact that we talked about it makes it unclear.
Mr.
mean,
Kramer,
switching
do you
it
have
to
a
just-
comment?
Well, why don't you just say this is what is required, this
Yeah.
number?
Yep.
It's not minimum, it's not maximum. What you're saying is that you need 10 parking spots. You can't
Yeah.
have more than 10 parking spots. You can't have fewer than 10 parking spots.
yeah, that's what I was
So why not
thinking,
say
just,
the required exact number of parking spots.
Yeah, but what that conveys to the reader is that's what's required, and everyone goes to the minimum. You also have to say the maximum.
Yeah, I like what you,
But that's where, that's my intention though, is if you get rid of the words min and max, or min/max, and that's just the standard, if they need to go above that, like the restaurant example, they're gonna come and talk to you. If they wanna go below that, they're gonna come talk to you. This is just
You
the,
have to put that parameter, because the way it's
We follow
You
you.
don't have any parameters.
Wait.
You have exact.
Yeah.
well, and maybe we say it that.
You have a minimum and a maximum of 10. It's an exact 10.
that's what you're driving
Okay.
at. You want it to be the min and the max.
Eric, do you have a comment?
Hey, we got you. I think what you're saying
Yeah,
makes
we got it.
sense. We'll clean it up.
Okay.
Good
Eric
point.
wants out of here.
No, I got more to say. I found thought of something
really have
for a staff update, but I'll wait till.
Okay. Do we have any more conversations around this?
The only other thing I asked, are you ready for a public hearing, or do you want to discuss it one more time?
That was where I was going with this. All right, so pending staff makes the adjustments as discussed tonight. A little bit of verbiage, we're gonna strike that one line, we're gonna make a few other things. Do I have a motion that pending those adjustments are made, that we will take this to public hearing at the next meeting in March?
Pending that, or, I know what you're trying to say, and I'd like to make a motion that we direct the staff to make these changes and then bring it to the next meeting for a public hearing, which is gonna be additional input anyways. So we're not finalizing it yet. That's my motion.
Do we have a second?
I'd second that.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Super.
So moved. All right.
Okay, now is there something else
All right.
you need to?
Eric, do you have anything else to add?
No, I sorry I didn't think of this, and certainly Councilmember Lodger can correct me if I make a mistake. So the council did, we are working towards some legislative agenda items this year. And those are starting to get some hearings. And the city has 3 legislative items that are starting in earnest. Senator Housley and Representative Hill have both introduced mirror bills in the House and the Senate, and they all relate to the King plant. Yeah, so in a nutshell, the first one relates to requiring Xcel Energy to have to provide us some specific dates for closure, cleanup, what have you. I think that the date for that report, I believe, is the end of 2025. So they need to kind of tell us what their game plan is then. Second piece is to provide the city some financial capacity for local government aid or transition aid. We've asked for $1 million. We'll see. You know, who knows? Right now, Oak Park Heights receives 0 local government aid because of the King plant. Fundamentally, is the anchor. So if that goes away, what does the city do? So we're asking for aid. The formulas that are in place for other cities would not apply to Oak Park Heights without a legislative change. So there's no automatic transfer. Bayport, for example, gets about $600,000 a year. I think Stillwater is about $1.4 million. If that plant goes away, Oak Park Heights doesn't automatically become eligible for that formula. So we've started that process. And the third one is obviously our bonding ask for extending utilities essentially to the perimeter of the site. The water, sewer, try to start thinking about those stormwater elements there. Because really, as you all know, we've all heard the reports, really what ultimately may go there, somebody's going to want to use the facilities, and there's going to need to be some kind of infrastructure provided to that site. So that's the third lift there. So, Mike, am I missing something? I think I'm missing one thing, but anyway, so that's what the council is earnestly working on through our lobbyists and staff and this and that. We'll see how it goes. More than you wanted to know, but I had to tell you. So.
No, I think it's great, and I was there on behalf of Minnesota Turkey Guards this week and spoke with both Commissioner Housley and Representative Hill, and they both mentioned the same thing you just told me.
Yeah,
So
they're
it's
great.
Definitely
They've
front
been
and forefront on their minds because.
And Senator Housley obviously lives in our community, so she's been nothing but a great advocate, so.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. All right. So seeing we have no more old business, informational, we've got some upcoming meetings coming up here, and they should be in your packet. Coming up, we've got the council meeting on the 14th, and then we've got the Parks and Trail on the 27th, and another council on the 28th before coming back to the planning March 9th. So, then we've got representatives for February 28th, and I will not be able to attend, but do we feel we need a representative at the city council meeting next, on the 28th, Mike?
Well, if that changes, I'll show up, so just let Eric know. And
Perfect, I appreciate that. All right, so do we, seeing no other items on the agenda, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
And moved and seconded, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Ta-da.
Cool.
It's Eric forgetting.
There was another bill.